weekly podcast. And we'd like to say happy holidays to all of you watching. And today I'm going to do something a little different. We've done it a little bit before. Instead of having a guest, I'm just going to tell you some anecdotes, some from my life and some that are sort of just like common knowledge stories of various musicians that have sort of been passed around, some of the folklore. But let's think here we are around Christmas time, holiday time. So here we are by the fire. And I'd like to tell you some of the interesting, start with a kind of Christmassy feeling. I've had some very memorable Christmases. Like everybody, we have some that we're just happy to be here and they pass by rather uneventfully. And other times around Christmas time or on Christmas, almost some kinds of, I wouldn't say miraculous. Sometimes maybe they're kind of miraculous events occur in our lives that definitely influence us spiritually. One example in my life was around it was in the late 70s, probably 77, 78. I'm not that great with exact dates, but it was around Christmas time. And I was in my repairman's shop on 48th Street. So a little background about 48th Street. 48th Street was known as Music Street, and all kinds of the music stores, Manny's and Ponte's and Art Shell and the guitar stores, Ippolito's drum shop. I think that was 48th Street too. But they were all in these couple of blocks between 6th Avenue and Broadway, 7th Avenue, Broadway. And you could just go there and hang out and, just to run into some incredible musicians. One place was Jim and Andy's. And Jim and Andy's was a bar on 48th Street. And Andy had been Jim's dog, who was deceased. And when Jim opened the bar restaurant, he named it Jim and Andy's, Andy being his canine friend. It had great veal scallopine, and because it was a restaurant, I was young enough, I was 16 at the time, but I could go in there unrestricted because it wasn't just a bar. Though that didn't really stop people in those days. If they liked you, they'd let you in even to the bar, serve you Coca-Cola and let you hang out with the cats. But Jim and Andy's had even an extra telephone. This was the days of the studios. So there'd be all kinds of studio dates going on all day and into the night. And they even had, as I was saying, a telephone there that would ring and you'd hear Jim holler out, or the waiter, trombone player needed for a record date in 2 hours or an hour over at such and such building, and everybody knew the buildings where the studios were. So over RCA Studios, blah, blah, blah. We need a French horn player, and then he might be well sitting in Jim and Andy's. And, you could come up with gigs. And it was, it was a magical place that Richie Kamuka, who was my teacher, brought me in there with Bill Berry and Jim Hall and some of the people from the Merv Griffin show, where they played and where I took my lessons. And, you'd sit there and you'd just see all these people that had been just a year before, pictures on my wall, sitting and talking with each other. You'd see Clark Terry and Snooky Young having a conversation, or you'd see Joe Newman. These were just trumpet players I'm thinking of. And, and Bill Berry or Ruby Braff or these people, or, Zoot and, Danny Bank or some of these great musicians all hanging out, talking, drinking, laughing, a lot of laughter. And in fact, a regular seat at the bar was held by Joe Jones, not Philly Joe, but Papa Joe Jones, who was, by all means, probably invented swing. The ding, 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 or what Lester Young called the titty boom rhythm, was basically the hi-hat being played on 2 and 4s. They called it the sock cymbal. That's all attributed to Joe Jones. And so he would sit there in the on his special seat at the bar, and if somebody was sitting there, they knew to get up if Papa Joe came in, because that was his place. And he had this shiny bald, much like my head, but darker, black, dark brown, and you could always see him from the back. The bar kind of faced away from the window, from the door, but everybody'd be sitting there, and Papa Joe be quietly sitting there drinking, and hanging with people. And he gave lessons over at Frankie Polito's drum shop, which was also right in the neighborhood there. And Elvin Jones also taught there. So if you walked up, I'd run into a drummer friend walking down the street and say, I got to buy some sticks over at Polito's. And you'd walk there and you'd see, in the course of 15 minutes, Papa Joe Jones, Elvin Jones, Roy Haynes, all these guys would be hanging out in there. And so that was a typical visit to Ippolito's. And, so anyway, at a certain point, they'd say, Papa Joe's going to give his blessing. And this bustle, everybody'd be talking, blah, 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 blah. All of a sudden, we'd get quiet. And maybe I exaggerate, because I was 16 and the world seemed much bigger. And every event seemed larger. But to me, it seemed like the whole room grew silent. And Papa Joe would get up from his bar stool, already kind of, feeling pretty good. And he would hold his hands out and say, you're all my children. You're all my children. And he gave his benediction. And one night, actually, I had a really nice time. I hung out with Joe and started to talk with him. And then I was going down to the half note, where I would sit in with Zoot Sims and Al Cohn or Richie Cabuca, Roy Eldridge, whoever was playing. They were nice to me and encouraged me. So this particular night, Joe sat in, Papa Joe, and I do believe that Wilbur Ware sat in on that same night, though I can't say I'm 100% sure of that, but I know at some point I played with Wilbur Ware just once there, and I only played with Papa Joe that once as well. But afterwards, we went out for breakfast. I bought him breakfast at the Child's restaurant, which was open all night. And then we went up to his hotel room in the Alvin Hotel, or the Edison. It was one of those hotels that they had in those days, residential hotels. So you had a hot plate, but you didn't, you could cook in the room, and you had a sink and a shower and, all the amenities of home, a bed. And a lot of musicians lived in residential hotels. Lester Young lived in one that was very famous that the cats would come to. When I met Chet Baker, he was living in one with his whole family in this rather large room at the Edison Hotel. But anyway, I went up to Joe's room. I can't remember if it was the Alvin or the Edison. And he had one of these tiny little record players that folded up. And we listened to music all night. And he played me a lot of a tenor player named Jimmy Forrest, who he said after Lester Young was his favorite tenor player. And he was always very, very nice and a sweet cat. And, but to tell my Christmas story, so there was this world of 48th Street. And one of the aspects of 48th Street was all the repair shops were there. And, your repairman was sort of a combination of being your repairman, your bank, and your psychiatrist. These guys served multiple functions. And, Nick Engelman was the first one that I met. And he was very legendary for doing, the horns of Coltrane, Sonny Rollins. everybody used Nick. I mean, there were still other people, but then Nick retired, and then there were many other guys. There was Artie Pincus, Shelley Marcus, Saul Fromkin, who was my particular guy at that time. He later retired, moved to Florida, and is no longer with us for quite a while. Rod Baltimore was another guy who people would go to a lot. A guy named Shelley Marcus. Later on, there was Bill Singer and Perry Ritter. And all of these people were very close to the musicians that used them for repair. So anyway, one day, I was in my friend, banker, repairman, and psychiatrist Saul Fromkin's shop. And it was around Christmas time. And it was the late 70s. Like I said, I can't remember the year. But I had gotten my soprano fixed. So, and it was this soprano, my old Con. And I was checking my horn, who had just gotten fixed. And I was playing this song, Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas, as it was Christmas time. So I was playing. And then I couldn't remember what happened next. I knew the song. And I was just said, oh, gee, what goes on after that? And then I hear a voice from above. Literally, not in the biblical sense, but there was a very tall man. I could hear the voice traveling down to me. And it said, that's a very lovely soprano sound you have there. It's a hard axe. I've been practicing on mine, and I can't quite grasp the real sound that I want out of it. It's some work to get that. You sound good, man. And it was, I looked up, and it was Dexter Gordon, who I had never seen in person. I had his records. And as a matter of fact, he'd been back for a while, but every time he played at the Vanguard, I meant to go or was about to go, and I would get a last minute gig or something would come up, and I had not gotten to see him. So I know he was open. It was a Tuesday night. It was a Tuesday afternoon. And I know that was his opening night at the Vanguard. And I was thinking that morning, this is some synchronicity. Gee, tonight I'm going to catch Dexter at the Vanguard. I haven't caught him yet, and I've really been meaning to hear him in person. So, because my friends have been telling me, man, you've heard him on records and this and that, but live, he's something else too. So, I was anxious to hear him. So there he is. And we started talking, and I said, Dexter, you know a lot of songs, and I'm embarrassed, but I can't think of the bridge to this song. I got to, have yourself a merry little Christmas. Make the Yuletide bright. From now on, your troubles will be out of sight. And the second time, make the Yuletide gay. From now on, our troubles will be far away, miles away. And then here, and I couldn't think of it. And Dexter said, this is embarrassing for me too, man. But I can't think of it either. And so we both sat there. I said, no, come on, you put me on. He said, no, it's true, man. I'm digging for it, but I can't, I know it's there. I said, yeah. And Saul said, I know it too, but I can't think of it either. So we were the last people in the shop for the day. And Saul pulled out a bottle of Four Roses whiskey and 3 paper cups. And we had a little toast to Christmas. And then Saul said, you can go, well, time to head back to Jersey. And, have a good week, Dexter. And, so we left the shop together and wordlessly just about headed over to Colony Music, which is, for those of you that don't know, in Midtown, the location for records from all eras, used and new, and sheet music. So, of course, we knew that the sheet music to that song was going to be a Colony Music. And we just walked into Colony Music, and we said, where's the Christmas music? And they said, oh, it's all in the back. So I'm there, one part of the back, combing the music racks, sheet music racks, and Dexter too, he's doing it too. Finally, I found it. I said, hey, Dex, I found it here. And so he put his arm around me. I opened the book, and we sang, from now on, our troubles will be out of sight. Here we are, as in olden days, lovely golden days of yore. Faithful friends who are dear to us will be near to us once more. And we finished the song. From now on, we'll all be together. If the fates allow, hang a shining star upon the highest bough, and have yourself a merry little Christmas now. And we sang it at a pretty good volume. The two of us were sitting there singing it together, and it was just a lovely feeling. And then Dexter said, well, I'm in the mood for some Christmas cheer. How about you? And I said, that would be great. He said, come on, I'll buy you a taste. So we found a bar, and we sat down, and we drank and talked about everything, talked about music, talked about life. Had a, terrific thing, how it was to be neglected all those years and now suddenly be acclaimed. And, he really had a type of personality that was very magnanimous, a very big generosity of spirit. And he was just lovely to talk to. And then we left and he said, well, I think we got time for another one. Want to go to a different bar? I said, yeah, sure. So I think we had 1 or 2 in the first one. Now we're heading out to the second place. And people are stopping him in the street. They're going, oh, Dexter Gordon. Hey, Dexter Gordon, so good to have you back, baby, and blah, blah, blah. And one person said, Dexter Gordon and Bob Mover. And I felt so good that somebody, he knew me too. So that made me feel good. And then Dex said, well, he had to go back and get dressed and get ready for the gig. And he said, what are you doing? And I said, it's funny, I was preparing to go hear you down at the Vanguard. And he said, well, you must come as my guest. And I said, well, yeah, thank you very much. But I get into the Vanguard. I don't have to pay to get in because I played there and I know Max Gordon and all that, the Jed and the people that work there. So, but thank you, but I'm coming down tonight. So I came down and we hung at night. We hung in the back room between sets. We talked, we laughed, we drank. And at the end of the night, I went to pay my tab. And they said that it had been taken care of by Dexter. And I went to thank him. And I said, you didn't have to do that. And he said, well, I told you to come as my guest. I invited you as my guest. And this is how one should treat their guests. This is how I treat my guests. So that was just a lovely time. And I never really saw him again, strangely enough. I mean, even when he was playing, I was somewhere else, or I was out of town, or just didn't do it. Now, several years later, the aftermath of this story is I was in Daffy's department store in Herald Square, and they were playing Christmas music. This is maybe, a good 7 or 8 years after. And I've never known, but it seems that Dex had recorded the song, Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas. And so I was there, looking at suits and sport jackets and those things. And
from iPhone.
And then all of a sudden, this happened. I heard this. I said, what? Here comes the bridge. And, I wondered, probably not, but it was like, I said, I wonder if when he was recording that, if he had a little flashback on that memory, which I don't flatter myself and think that he did, but it was a nice thought to think that it might have been, had some effect on that. And, he was, I would have loved to have known him better. There are some stories of him. One story I really like a lot that Chan Parker told me, Chan Parker Woods, I should say. When they did that movie around midnight, Autour de Minuit, and Dexter got nominated for an Academy Award as an actor for that. For those of you who don't know that, he played a semi-fictional saxophone player named Dale Turner that was partly Dexter, partly Lester Young, partly Bud Powell. Or that was how the character was envisioned. And Dexter put his own touch onto that, improvising such wonderful lines as when he talks to a young, the protagonist's young preteen daughter and tells her as he's trying reeds, he says, happiness is a wet number 2.5 Rico reed. And classic lines like that. But besides that, the funny part of it, the story that Chan told me that I found so inspirational too, is, he was a natural method actor, it seems, because in the movie, the first tune that this character plays, he's not been on tour for a while, he's been off the scene, and he's back into it, and he plays a version of As Time Goes By. And Chad said it was so beautiful, the version of that tune that he played on the set, that she almost blew the take, because when it finished, she wanted to shout out, yeah, Dex. And of course, that wasn't his name in the movie. It was Dale. So she said she caught herself just in time for doing that. And everybody it was one of those things that was so beautiful that even the people listening, it took a second for them to applaud because it was so nice. That's what Ira Sullivan said, we aspire to that. He said, applause is great. But when you get those moments where that split second or a few seconds go by before people applaud, then you've really affected them. I remember Ira telling me that and having experienced that a few times in my life. But anyway, so Dexter says, we've got to do another take of that. And everybody's like, Tavernier, the director, Bertrand Tavernier, and Francis Baudras is there, and everybody's there. The French, they're, why? Pourquoi? Un autre, why? And Dexter says, well, the way I see it is I played that song as Dexter Gordon, as me. And I've been playing a lot. I'm in good shape. And, that's all fine. But this character, he hasn't been playing for a while. So wouldn't it be good if he started out a little tentative? And a little tentatively, and then let him get into it in the course of the song, let him get a little stronger as he goes along. So actually, the version that we, I guess, hear in the movie is Dexter just being a little bit less confident than he had played it the first time, to be more in character musically with who that character is. So, I think he should have gotten an Academy Award nomination just for that alone, that kind of awareness. There have been a lot of times great musicians have a larger than life quality to what they do. And that may be some, the fact that Dexter brought me, he didn't know me. He knew I knew his band because I knew actually the cast that were working with him and everything. And he told me he had heard my name, but he just treated me like we'd known each other, forever. And I wished I lived next door to him, that he would, other people have that magnanimity. And what a friend of mine, I've said it before, but that generosity of spirit that, for instance, Sonny Rollins is another person who also has that type of personality. I have a beautiful story. Since we're talking about generosity and Christmas, and we're kind of on that theme. One story of Sonny that I could tell you that expresses this kind of element of generosity is one year. It wasn't Christmas time, I remember that, but don't know what season it was. But Sonny was playing the Village Gate, and usually when Sonny played, when he played at the Vanguard, like I generally got into the Vanguard, so there was no problem with that. When he played elsewhere, if I was working, I'd pay the admission and do that kind of thing. But other times, sometimes this particular year wasn't a great year for me. I was in between gigs, leaving Chet Baker and trying to establish my own band, and it'd been a rough year economically. I was making it, paying the rent, but it was rough. And I had talked to Sonny. We were on the phone, and we used to talk fairly regularly on the phone. And I said, "Hey, you're playing this weekend over at the Gate." I said, I would love to come hear you. Do you think? I hate to ask you this. Do you think you could get me in one night? Sonny said, "Of course. Sure. Come as my guest." He said, "In fact, bring a friend." And he said, "You want to come Friday or Saturday?" And I said, "Well, Friday, it was a rather new band he had. I think Saturday would be maybe the best night, the second night of the gig." He said, "Sure, I'll leave your name and this and that." So I brought a friend of mine, a lady who was my buddy, named Catchy Cartwright. And Catchy teaches out in California. She's a very fine flute player. And she married a very good saxophone player who also teaches out there. And, we were, friends, and Catchy had never heard Sonny live. And I said, "Sure, come on with me, and we'll go together." So we went to the Gate, and they told us that, no, unless you walk in with the artist, no names are given. There is no guest list. And plus the whole set was sold out. So you had to come back. He was doing 3 sets, like 2 fairly long ones, and then 1 short one at the end. And even if you're Miles Davis, nobody comes in unless you enter with him. You can't get in. And plus this set is all sold out, so we can't even let you in. If you were to pay, it just wouldn't work. So we decided, well, Dave Liebman was playing over at Sweet Basil. And so I had a bar tab over at Sweet Basil. So I said, let's go over there, because we were both pretty broke. But, if we had and we went over to Basil, and we listened to Dave, and we chatted with Dave in between sets. And it turned out Dave said that he was with his band Lookout Farm. And he said, this is the last weekend of Lookout Farm. I'm breaking the band up. And he said, but tomorrow night, Sunday night, if you'd like to come by and play with me for the end of the last sets of the band, I invited Mike Brecker, and you guys both want to come and play, that would be great. And Dave, being another very generous spirit, I said great. So had we gotten in okay with the Village Gate, I wouldn't have been invited by Dave, to go the next night. So sometimes life just works out in ways you don't expect it to. And so, but then Catchy said, look, he didn't say it was sold out for the next set. And I really had my heart set on hearing Sonny. And, do you have any money at all? I said, I do. I have about, $7 or $8. She said, look, it's $5 each. The admission was $5 at that time. And she said, I've got $10. Let me take us. And, don't worry about it. You buy the drinks. We can afford one drink each. I think we'll be able to do it. So I said, okay. And Catchy paid for us. So we got in. And so in between sets, I saw Sonny, as he kind of got off the bandstand, Sonny sat down at somewhere, and he looked at me, and he kind of beckoned for me to come over. So I said to Catchy, excuse me for a minute. We had a table. And Sonny said, he said, hello, friend. I remember that was such a nice greeting. And he said, did you get in okay? And I said, actually, we didn't get in okay, but we found the money between us to get in. And, we're really happy that we did. And, we're cool. Don't worry. He said, well, why don't you come backstage after the last set? He said, bring your friend. So he looked at her. She's quite an attractive girl. And I said, yeah, Catchy, we're going to go back to the stage and see Sonny and say hello. So he played the last set. We go backstage, and Sonny goes, well, Bob, so nice you came by, and I was thinking about you. Oh, and what a lovely girl. He was just, you might interpret it as chauvinistic now, but it was very charming. He really was like, what a lovely girl, and what lovely taste you have in women. Guys wouldn't say that now, I don't think. But anyway, in that time, it was considered, it was a very debonair, rather Cary Grantish way to approach it. And then he made up a story. And he said, remember how we used to take those taxis from the Vanguard and I'd drop you home? Which is true, because I lived on McDougal Street, and Sonny had just gotten his place down in Tribeca, which wasn't called Tribeca yet. But he was down there on North Moore Street, or in Greenwich Street, right? And remember that night that I thought I had cash, but I had only the check from the Vanguard, and I'd left all my cash at home, and you lent me that $10. You remember you paid the taxi, you gave me that money to pay the taxi. Now this never happened. I never gave Sonny money to pay any taxi, but I played along. I said, I vaguely remember that. I kind of remember that. He said, well, here's that bread I owe you. And he handed me the $10 that we had paid to get in. And I was just so humbled and honored that Sonny would, with all the stuff going on in his life and trying to make that band and play that great music, that he had time to think of my little existence in the middle of all that. And that was a very, a revealing moment of where Sonny showed his character. And, it's a parallel with the kind of things that Dexter would have. Other people, another Christmas story that's kind of funny is Mike Knock, piano player, very good piano player from New Zealand originally, was in New York for many years, and he lived in a beautiful loft in downtown in the Village, and it was a large space loft, and he had a Christmas party, and Charlie Mariano, who had been a teacher of Mike's and a friend, and Mike had also played in some bands of Charlie's. Great saxophone player Charlie Mariano was visiting the States. He had been living in India, and then he lived in Europe and didn't really move back to the States, but he was visiting. And Mike brought him to New York to play a gig at Sweet Basil with him. And this party was going on. It was a real New York, like almost like a breakfast at Tiffany's kind of party where everybody's crowded in and jam packed in this, and he had a spacious loft, but there must have been 200 people there. It was like incredible amount of people, and even though the place was pretty big, it was tight. But I was so happy to meet Charlie. So Mike said, "Hey, Charlie Mariano's here," and I was like, "Oh man, take me to him. I've got to meet him," because I was a big fan of his, and he had been an influence on me. And he was Charlie Mariano, and he was wearing this beautiful Indian type of a Nehru suit with this also was the late 70s, mid 70s, right around that time. White, it was silk or rayon, but some kind of delicate material. And it just looked fantastic. Charlie looked wonderful in it. And it was definitely in the style of India, like a Nehru kind of thing. It was, and it was all white, very, very lovely. And so we were talking, and Charlie and I hit it off right away. We were really having a great conversation because he was actually from Lynn, Massachusetts, and my mother was from Lynn, and my dad was from Revere, Boston, that whole North Shore area. And in fact, Lynn was the first place I stayed when they brought me home from the hospital in Boston. We had a little apartment in Lynn. So, and we knew a lot of, of course, I knew a lot of the Boston musicians and everything. I had grown up with Charlie, the older cats, and they all, to them, he was a huge legend. And, and anyway, he was a beautiful cat. And we talked about life, and he told me a story about his guru. He says, well, Charlie had gone to India, and one of the things he did in India was he learned this Indian, basically what's an Indian saxophone called the Nagaswaram. And Charlie had become adept at playing this instrument. And he went to India to study it. So I remember asking him about that experience. And he told me that perhaps the two greatest moments of his musical life were, one thing was sitting in with Charlie Parker, who of course was his idol. And the other thing was being able to go inside the temple. They let him practice outside the temple. He had a teacher, and the teacher said, "You practice outside the temple." And he did. Every day he went out and he practiced outside the temple. And one day the teacher said, "You're ready to practice. You're ready to play inside the temple." He said, and to him, this was a fantastic moment. And I said to him, I had been reading Yogananda, and Yogananda says that in Sanskrit, the literal translation of a musician is one who sings the praises of the divine, or, whatever that Sanskrit word is for God, or they don't really call it God, but they call it the universe, or, there's that word. I said, but so he must have been a very spiritual person, probably very well behaved and disciplined. And Charlie said, well, yes and no. He said he was a very extremely great musician, very dedicated to music. And there was a very strong spiritual quality to him. But unfortunately, he was a terrible drunk, and he died at 30. And I was thinking, wow, even there, that happens to them too, So now while we're in the middle of all this, I'm drinking red wine. And as we're talking, as I said, it was kind of tight at the party, a lot of people, but not that much space. Somebody bumps into me, and the red wine spills out. I don't know if you've seen that television commercial with the towels, the Scott towels, and you see that the drink is spilling, and it's going there, and they wipe it up with the towel at the last minute. Well, there were no Scott towels around. This just is almost like my life went into slow motion. I saw the glass tip over as the person hit me, accidentally bumped into me, and the red wine spilled out all over Charlie's white outfit. Well, I was mortified. I was like, I felt terrible. Here's one of my idols, one of my favorites, and I'm having a beautiful time meeting him. And I've just now spilled wine all over him. And I feel like a total idiot, even though it wasn't entirely my fault. But nevertheless, there had to be a way I could have avoided that or something. So I'm like apologetic all over the place. Charlie, oh man, I'm so sorry. And I was working okay at this time. I had a gig. I was playing a lot at Sweet Basil and some other places around the city. So I said, Charlie, please, let me, whenever you get it clean for you, and send me the bill. I'll take care of it. And I'd be really happy to do that. I'm really sorry that, I did that. I mean, I should have looked, blah, blah, blah. And Charlie looked at me and he said, well, I think you should get another glass of wine. And, I mean, that's cool. I mean, you talk about role models, I mean, I knew how far away I was from having that kind of attitude for that to happen to me at that time. But it just gave me something to aspire to, for sure. And, by the way, while I'm here, if anybody has any questions or comments and would like to, I'm here, by the way, I don't know if you see Jesse. They see you, Jesse, as well? They don't. Well, Jesse Kaiser, who's my, really the other half of these podcasts, does all of the basic work that, except for talking, which is what I tend to do, and my guests. But Jesse is the producer. I think you would call her the producer of the show, of the podcast. She's here, so if you get in touch with her, there is a way to do that, right? Just email us, or call us, or I don't know.
Now they can see me. You guys can just either send a message in the chat, the Yahoo chat, or give Bob a call, which would be better than me because he can answer you, directly live on YouTube. And his number, Bob, want to say it out loud?
Sure. 917-593-6199. And I'm just going to make sure I don't have it on airplane mode. But sometimes I do that when we should be able to reach me. And so I'm thinking of another Christmas story that I can tell you, and another person of great generosity, and was my friend and one of my mentors, Phil Woods. And, Phil was a hilarious character, had some very funny one-liners and lines that were, invaluable. But, when I was 15, Phil heard me as part of an all-star band, high school band in Miami, and gave me a scholarship to this camp called Ramblerny, which was in New Hope, Pennsylvania. And that was, Phil ran, it was a performing arts camp. And Phil was the director of the music program there, which was the jazz program. And Roger Rosenberg was there. Brooks Kerr, who was a wonderful piano player. Mike Brecker had been there the 2 years before I was there, but he came and spent a week at the camp. And that's where Mike and I first became friends as well. And there was a situation in my life at that time where, because of my parental situation and my home life was very um, erratic type of situation, and I really didn't have anywhere to go. And Phil and Chan were not legally adopt me, but they asked me if I could. They offered to have me live with them in New Hope, Pennsylvania, and I was my dad said it was good that I could do that, and so I was going to live with my one of my heroes, and Chan was also someone I was very close to. Chan was Phil's wife, and she had been married, though she had been with Charlie Parker. I consider it married, even if they didn't legitimize it. They had two children together, and she. But she, after Bird's death, she went with Phil. So it turned out that Phil canceled the plans, Phil and Chan, for me to live with them that summer because they planned to go to Europe. And this just came up even after they had talked to me, but they they kind of made an audible, changed plans. And as much as I believe that they did love me, they couldn't afford to take me to Europe. And my father really couldn't afford to send me there either. So I ended up, living elsewhere, and that's another part of my story, which I'm going to save for my memoirs. But the main thing is that they invited me to spend Christmas with them that Christmas, and that was the Christmas of 1967. And I was 15 years old, and we were temporarily living in Ohio. And I went to spend a couple of weeks in New York at the Christmas vacation. I stayed part of the time with my good friend Brooks Kerr and another fellow named Jim Berkeley, who I had met at Phil's camp. They both lived in Manhattan, so I had a place to stay and spend time in the city with them. Because Phil was mainly living in New Hope, Pennsylvania, and in Chan's mother's house. I think Chan's mother was not around anymore, and they lived there with Kim, who was Chan's daughter from her first marriage before Bird, but she took the name Kim Parker, and was a wonderful singer, and she's still around. She's great. And two children that Phil and Chan had together, named Garth, who has his own business these days, and Aimee, the younger daughter, who unfortunately died young. And Baird. Baird was the son of Charlie Parker and Chan. And we were the same age, Baird and I. And Baird sort of played bass. And so they offered for me to come there. But anyway, I didn't spend the entire Christmas vacation with them, but I did go down for Christmas. And that year at Christmas, Richie Cole was the other house guest. So Richie and I hadn't met Richie. He'd gone to the camp but the year before I was there. And after our initial sibling rivalry, Richie and I liked each other. And we had similar but different senses of humor. And, ended up having a nice time. And, spent Christmas with Phil and Chan and the children. And Chan made me a beautiful scarf that she actually knitted for me. And Phil gave me a copy of Oliver Nelson's Patterns for, which was called Patterns for Saxophone then, became Patterns for Jazz. And but one night or afternoon, I think, Phil said to me, come here, we're going to go to the other room and I'm going to give you we're going to sit down at the piano and I'm going to give you my personal Christmas present for you. And so he sat down with me for about 45 minutes, an hour or so. And he said, this is something you should do as often as you can. And he said, you take one note and you think about what it can be in every context possible. I said, yeah. He said, for instance, if you take the note C, it's the root of C anything. C major, C minor, C seventh, C, C minor 7 flat 5, whatever it is. But then if D flat were your root, what would C be in relation to D flat? I said the major 7th. He said, right, of D flat major 7th. Any other thing? And well, the major 7th of D flat minor major 7th. Yeah. And D flat major 7 flat 5. That gives you that fourth on top between the G and the C. So, you try every context that you can hear that chord in, and you kind of study, and you see you study it intervallically, and you see what's going on one by one. If D were your root, then, well, it's the 7th. Yeah, the 7th of D 7th, and the 7th of D minor 7th, the 7th of D minor 7 flat 5, the 7th of D 7th sharp 5, D 7th flat 5, and you hear all the relationships. You sit there and you look at that chord and you think about this note and you hear it, and then you make mental understandings of every relationship that's in there. That D 7 sharp 5, it's a whole step above the sharp 5, which is also the flat 13th. It's a major third above the flat 5, which is also the plus 11. Or, it's a minor 6 down from that. And Phil just taught me to look and hear each little chord, each note with every chord. And he said, just do that. He said, just take 2 or 3, maybe 2 or 3 notes a week and just keep repeating it. Just do it again and again, over and over, and keep that up, all your life, or as long until you feel so comfortable that you know what every note is in your sleep. So Phil taught me that, and we had a delightful, New Year's together. And he was always a very beautiful person. So there's a funny story about Phil too. This is more in the Bill Crow category. I mean, there's a wonderful raconteur, Bill, who has written books of jazz anecdotes and stuff. He's just the most engaging person. And I have a few stories. Bill, who's now 96 years old, I think, has several years on me, and knew all these people very intimately and well. And, he's a treasure trove of these things. So I know a few things, and I've got a few stories. But one thing I like that they told me about Phil, and it's so typical Phil, he took the solo on Billy Joel's Just the Way You Are, and the whole ba 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 ba, that stuff, that's all, Phil. And that record sold very, very well and really put Billy Joel on the map. And, but, they hadn't met because Phil just overdubbed over the record and improvised that solo and basically, made it as a record date and got paid, I think, double scale or something decent, but definitely not in the proportion to what that record sold. But as it turned out, Phil was playing, and it did improve Phil's bookings in his career. So Phil was playing somewhere, and Billy Joel was also playing not far away. And somebody told Billy, Phil is down the street. Billy said, I've never met him. Let me come down and meet him. So they tell Phil, who's backstage, Billy Joel is here and he wants to meet you. So he says, sure, send him in. And Billy and Phil talk and they hit it off. And, then Phil's got to go back on. And Billy says, yeah, I'm going to go out, catch you, listen to you. And they shake hands and Billy starts to leave the room. And Phil says, Billy, just one thing. And Billy says, what is it, Phil? Sure. He says, I just want you to know something. Billy says, yeah, Phil, what? He says, I made you and I can break you. that's Phil was a funny guy. And and that, another one. I mean, Zoot Sims and Al Cohn were also from that ilk, from that same crowd, and part of what fueled a lot of these cats was, alcohol was certainly a part of their lives, and I mean, Phil, who was he could be, as what they say, a two-fisted drinker when he wanted to be, really lived a long time, even though he had emphysema, as he smoked a lot of cigarettes like I did. Uh, he Phil made it to, I believe he was 84 years old, and that's good. But Zoot and Al didn't quite. I don't think they made 60, maybe 61, 62, maybe. I don't keep track of everybody that way. I would have to be kind of morbid to understand what year, how long everybody lived. But there was, Zoot. I mean, Al Cohn had a very dry kind of sense of humor, um, where Zoot was a lot more, I wouldn't say slapstick, but he was a lot more, well, they were different. Al, for instance, when Al was on his deathbed, somebody asked him, "How do you feel?" And Al said, "Like a million lira." A million lira was about $600. So that's a typical Al Cohn. And Al was a great, really, I mean, well, he was a great writer, and he could play anything, sight read and play the hell out of it and do those kind of things. And he did the New York Times in ink, in pen, the Times crossword puzzle. I mean, he would do that in ink, and was an encyclopedia and kind of a thesaurus of information. Like I asked Al about the song "No More," "You Ain't Gonna Bother Me No More." The Billie Holiday had sung it, and Al was like, "Well, that was written by Toots Camerata, who was an arranger for Billie." And then he'd tell you a story about Toots and how that was written and what other things that Toots did, and you'd get the whole. He had a very compartmentalized, brilliant type of mind, and he was also funny as hell. Um, Zoot, I guess there's more one-liners, though I'm sure Bill Crow has just as many of Al. But I knew, Zoot had certain. There's a wonderful. Well, he had certain one-liners that were great, like Benny Goodman was known to be a very difficult personality to deal with. I mean, people that worked with him definitely respected his musicianship, but as a leader, as a personality, he was very difficult to get along with. I didn't know the man, but that was what I heard about him. Um, the the famous story, the story that actually Hank Jones corroborated. I had heard the story about Benny, but I asked Hank if this were true, because I think he had been on the band when this happened. It was summertime, and they were rehearsing a small group of Benny's over at Benny's apartment on Park Avenue, Fifth Avenue. He had a very nice, luxurious apartment. I mean, for those of you who maybe are younger people, who don't have an idea of the magnitude of Benny's stardom, in his day, he was like the Beatles or Elvis or something like that. He was that big in his own time. And, anyway, the band was rehearsing at Benny's house, and it was August, and it was very hot out. So everybody was kind of dressed in, Bermuda shorts, Hawaiian shirts, or t-shirt, those kind of people really didn't walk in t-shirts in those days, but short sleeve shirts, chinos, light pants. And they got to Benny's house and the air conditioner was on and it was very cold. So they're having this rehearsal and the female singer, I forget who it was, Helen Forrest or Helen O'Connor, one of those singers said to Benny, "Oh, Benny, don't you find it rather cold in here?" And Benny said, "You're right." And Benny left the room. And a few minutes later, Benny came back into the room and he was wearing a sweater. He had put on a sweater. And, everybody else be freezing in there. And they asked Zoot what it was like. Benny was the first American musician to take a band to Russia when it was the Soviet Union. And they had this record, Benny Goodman in Moscow, and it was a very big deal in the I think it was the late 1950s that he took this band over to Russia. And somebody said, "What was it like going to Russia with Benny Goodman?" And Zoot said, "Every day with Benny was like being in Russia." And,
We actually have a question. If you don't mind, I'll read it out loud.
Sure.
From Cardos Dukes. It says, "Mr. Mover, could you please tell some anecdotes about the Belgian bassist J.L. Rasenfoss?" I think I'm pronouncing that right.
Jean-Louis Rasenfoss. Sure. I will get to that in 1 minute. I'm just going to tell this one story about Zoot that cracks me up. There's more. I'll tell it at a different time. But Jean-Louis is a very good friend of mine, and he's just a lovely human being. We worked with Chet Baker on some occasions, and then this band I was going over and playing with my friend and student John Snauart, we would use Jean-Louis as often as possible. I'll tell you this story about Zoot, and then I'll talk about Jean-Louis for a minute. I'm glad you mentioned him. He's a wonderful cat and a great bass player. So my friend Turk Morrow was a very fine tenor player who was very close friends with Zoot now. And he played a lot. He played with Buddy Rich's big band on baritone, mostly. And he made a nice record on tenor called The Underdog, I think, for Muse Records. And Turk's real name was Mauro Turso, but he was known as Turk Morrow. And his brother is a very fine drummer named Ronnie Turso. But Turk told me this story, which I think is great. Turk had broken up with a lady. He was in his early 20s when this happened. He was maybe 24, 25. And he was pretty depressed about that, because as Turk put it to me, that relationship had ended and it was entirely his fault. Whatever he did, it was irreparable, and they were never going to be together again. And he didn't give me all the details, but it was over. And so he spent the weekend, or the good better part of a week, in his apartment in Queens, just being sad and lamenting the loss of this relationship. And then he said to himself, well, before he got to go entirely crazy, he better get out of the apartment. So Zoot was playing over at the Half Note down on Spring and Hudson Street. And Kurt gets in his car and he goes and he drives into Manhattan and goes to the Half Note. And Zoot says, how you doing? How you doing, kid? He had kind of a gravelly voice, much like I sound today. And Turk said, well, not too well, Zoot. I've lost, I don't remember her name, but we won't call her anything, but the girl. And, it's all my fault, and I just can't stop thinking about her, and the fact that it's over, and this and that. And Zoot says, well, yeah, that's very painful, man. listen, maybe you got your horn. Maybe if you play a little bit with us, we got the last set coming up. Why don't you sit in? You'll feel better. Maybe, make you feel better if you play. And he says, well, I got the horn in the car. Zoot says, go get your horn. Come on, play the last set with us. Another example of generosity from a great player. And so they get on the bandstand and they start the set, and Zoot's like, back home again in Indiana, etc. And a nice blues. And now it's ballad time. So he says, Turk, go ahead, call the ballad. And Turk says, body and soul. So Turk starts to play. And he's thinking, he's from the generation that those cats, Zoot and Al and Richie Kamuka and Phil and all these people, we knew the lyrics, they knew the lyrics, and we, the younger generation, would emulate our elders, and we would learn the lyrics too. I mean, maybe not just out of that. But as Turk's playing, he's thinking of the lyric, my heart is sad and lonely. For you I cry, for you, dear, only. I have no voice because I had this tracheostomy, so you have to forgive my singing. But why haven't you seen it? I'm all for you, body and soul. And he's thinking as he's playing, he's remembering her. And he's thinking about tender moments he had with her and how they'll never be again. I spend my day, then he's like, wondering why it's me you're wronging, because she won't take him back. Then he gets to the bridge. I can't believe it. It's hard to conceive it that you'd turn away romance. Are you pretending? It looks like the ending. Unless I could have one more chance to prove, dear. At this point, he can't control it anymore, and tears start coming out of his eyes. The tears are falling down to his fingers from his eyes, and then finally, my life a wreck you're making. You know I'm yours for just the taking. I'd gladly surrender. Now, he's drenched in tears. He finishes the tune, and Zoot whispers to him, that was nice, Turk. Very sensitive, very lovely. But you see, you want to make them cry. And what you want to do, Turk, is you want to make them cry. And that's a typical Zoot thing. The other thing somebody asked, Zoot used to get very drunk, and he could still play. He could play to the point where the average person wouldn't even be able to walk. But Zoot would be just stick him in the chair and he'll keep playing and he'll still sound great. And somebody said, Zoot, how do you do it? How do you get so inebriated and you still can play? What is it? What's your method? He says, I don't know, man. I guess it's because I practice drunk. But anyway, there are a lot of stories of, he's a very tall tale. I mean, there's a lot of tales of Zoot. And he was a lovely person. He was very kind to me. And I loved him dearly. Jean-Louis Rosenfoss is just a very straight ahead, no nonsense, clean living, basically, kind of guy. Sometimes he might eat a little too much pasta, but he doesn't have a lot of vices. When I met him, we were with Chet Baker together, and he picked me up in 1980 at the airport, 81, at the airport in Brussels, and drove me out to his house out in the country that he practically built the whole house. He, as he said, he wished if he'd have practiced all those hours he spent building the house, God knows what kind of bass player he would have been. But he still was a fine bass player, and is. And, he's humble and humorous, very funny. If you hang out with him in a quiet way, he's got a quiet humor. And, my first trip to Paris, Jean-Louis took me to really, a good restaurant and gave me a little tour of, like a cook's tour of Paris. And, and we've just been on the road off and on. We toured with Chet we we dealt with Chet. Mostly, we had a lot of fun with Chet. You know, there were some moments that were kind of rough, but having Jean Louis around, he was like a big brother that was a little more sane than I was. So, you know, he always was a kind of security, you know, a person who I could feel secure being around. And, you know, there's really, he played a lot too with, he made some beautiful records. There's a trio with our good friend Claudio Roditi and a pianist. I don't remember the name of the pianist, but it's a drumless trio with Claudio and Jean Louis and this piano player. They sound really good. And I don't know what else I can tell you about him. You know, I don't have really a lot of anecdotes. We worked a lot together. We'd listen to the music sometimes in the tapes of the gig. We would tell each other stories and have memories together of our days with, you know, with Chet. Um, there, actually, on one of these podcasts, I'm going to do a podcast about Chet. I'm not sure when, and I'm going to ask Jean Louis to talk a little on that one. So stay kind of tuned to this, and at some point we'll have Jean Louis um, come into this for a moment with us. Um, well, I guess, you know, I've got a bunch of, I made notes and I have like 15 stories here, but I'm not going to really tell them all. So I think that in order to keep it at a reasonable uh, time, timeage, no, a reasonable amount of time to air this, I think if there's any more questions, I'll ask that. And I think that's about, uh, that would probably do that for today. I wish everybody a beautiful holiday season, you know, Christmas and Kwanzaa, whatever you, Hanukkah is over now, but if you observe that, I hope you had a good one. And of course, New Year's Eve is coming. You know what I miss about New Year's Eve? It's really weird. I don't really miss New Year's Eve gigs at all because you play to a bunch of drunks, and usually, and it's Richie Kamuka used to call it amateur night because anybody who, and Sue called it that too, who really drank didn't have anything to do. But I really miss playing. Maybe it's just too early in the game, but just thought I'd ask you just the same. What are you doing New Year's? New Year's Eve? You know, Frank Lesser, one of the great songwriters, you know. So these are too dry. Anyway, that's a nice song. What are you doing New Year's Eve? And, this read is a little too hard. But um, that's right. Yeah, maybe I'm crazy to suppose that I could be the one that you chose out of the millions of invitations you received. Yeah. Anyway, I'll practice that. And the dogs, I think they didn't. They could tell I made a mistake. They don't like that. And I mean, that's it, something like that. Anyway, just trying to practice my soprano a little. Got to get the reed. I put that on just a minute before I started the show. I should have a wet reed. Never try to play with a dry reed, especially soprano. Anyway, so live and learn that. We can edit that out, right? And anyway, I would like to tell you, I'd like to thank you all, whoever is watching, for watching. And if you want to see more episodes like this one, please like this episode and subscribe at Bob Mover Jazzability. And if you tell others to join and watch this too, that also helps us. And you can go to our Patreon site as well, Bob Mover Jazzability, and we have some perks and stuff like that. And thanks for supporting us. And see you next time. Next week, we have an interesting show of, I think it's the Lee Konitz. Is that the show with Hal Galper and George Schuler and I? We're remembering Lee Konitz together. So I'm looking forward to that. And we have all that. Once again, thanks very much. And Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, and happy whatever holiday you're celebrating. Thank you, and God bless you. Bye-bye. Thanks to Jesse Kaiser.